Want me to let him in?
Yes, please. All right, good evening, everybody. This is Tammy Lemmer, President of Haslett Board of Education. I'm going to call tonight's meeting to order, Monday, November 23rd, 2020. If people please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of
America,
and
to the republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Now, correspondence. Madam Secretary, actually, let me do a quick roll call of board members first, and then we'll jump into correspondence. In no particular order, Secretary Wheeler, you can indicate that you're present.
Just be muted still.
She's muted.
Cami, can you hear us? We cannot yet hear you. I will circle back. Karen East.
Here.
Molly Palvarento.
Here.
Tracy Collins.
Here.
Greg Mashad.
Here.
Josh Morey.
Here.
And Cami, I see you. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Excellent. Okay.
I apologize. I don't know what was going on there, but
No problem. Zoom bingo has officially commenced.
yeah.
All right. So now we'll move on. Secretary Wheeler, if you can share any correspondence we've received since the last board meeting, please.
Yes, the HEA sent an email in response to our discussion at the last school board meeting about timeline and when to implement our hybrid learning plan. A specific date was recommended by the HEA in order to begin safely and effectively.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Also, we received an email correspondence from Jeff Ackerman, also regarding recommended start date for hybrid, more specifically face-to-face instruction. And that is it for correspondence.
Okay, and actually I think earlier this morning we received an email from Jeff Kessler as well. It looks like you may have been left off of that. There was a typo in the email address.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so now is the time in our agenda that we have set aside for public comment. I'll share, as I have been, just a reminder that individuals have up to 5 minutes per person to speak and address the board. This is not a two-way dialogue. It is an opportunity for people to share questions and or concerns. Questions will be forwarded on for addressing by staff as appropriate. I will need to ask for some assistance because I do not have access to a timer. So if someone could help me with the timing, that would be great. And I don't know if any of my board members or staff.
I could do that.
All right, Cami, you'll do that?
Sure.
All right, so you'll just
roll.
shout out when we hit the time.
Okay.
The way we're going to handle comments, as we've been doing via the Zoom platform, individuals online can queue up by raising their hand. You go to the participants icon at the bottom, the two little people, click the raise hand button, and then we will address I will call on you in the order that I see your names. If people are on the phone, you should still also have access. You can speak up when we've gone through the online folks. And if others are not able to communicate via phone or audio on the internet, we invite you to send a message to webmaster@haslett.k12.mi.us, and your comment will be read out loud as well. So with no further ado, I'm showing Elizabeth Malczewski is in line for public comment. And when we get her muted, we'll start the 5-minute clock.
Okay.
So if Elizabeth could be unmuted, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes, or no more than 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Elizabeth Malczewski, and I live within the Haslett School District. Both of my children are in elementary school. In a time when there is so much uncertainty, one of the most stable and loving relationships our children have is with their teachers. And that is a relationship that takes time, weeks and months to build. With your hybrid plan as it currently stands, children in the elementary schools will be shifted into different classes based on the choices their parents make for their continued education. I believe that one of the most disruptive and harmful things you can do is take that relationship away from our children. I think it is irresponsible to reassign them to new teachers at this point in the year. It will affect their comfort and thus their ability to learn. I want nothing more than to have my children return to in-person learning, but it needs to be done thoughtfully and safely, and we should return only when data supports returning all students collectively. It has been several weeks since we were last surveyed about our wishes and intentions to be involved in a hybrid program or to have our children remain in a virtual environment. At that time, the statewide numbers were around 500 positive cases daily. Now, we have reached a milestone 10,000. My husband and I are both medical providers. I diagnose and treat COVID patients on a daily basis. Several weeks ago, I had requested that my children learn in a hybrid environment without the knowledge that they would have to change teachers. Now, with an increase in daily numbers and an escalating positivity rate, we no longer feel this is a safe or viable option, and I doubt that I'm alone. I am asking you this evening to send out another parent survey. I imagine there has been a seismic shift and that many more families intend to remain virtual. Lastly, we as a district strive for our A+ standing, but our success is determined most heavily by our teachers. They are the reason our children will thrive and succeed. In order for them to do their best, it is their opinions that should matter the most, how they feel they will be most successful in educating our children. In order to do this, they must feel heard, respected, and supported by their leadership within the administration and within the board. We will only excel when they are able to be at their best. When they were last surveyed, the overwhelming majority of teachers said they would feel safest and most effective in a virtual environment. I implore you to ask them again. Resurvey them so we can have that data, and then take that data and make it public. It is their opinions that should be weighted most heavily. If you go against their wishes, you will fail. We all will. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else wants to share questions, comments, or concerns during public comment this evening? Mr. Casson, have we received any emails?
No, we have not received any emails.
Okay, I'm showing someone in the queue for public comments online. If we could unmute Scott Skoranek, please. And Cami, it looks like you might be freezing, so can I have a backup timekeeper just in case? Can people hear me?
Yes. Well, I can
Okay.
certainly hear you.
Okay, very good. Do I have someone who's able to serve as timekeeper, please?
I'm trying to get there, Tammy.
Got it.
You let me know when to
Okay.
start. Are we good?
All right. We've got Karen on backup timekeeper. Mr. Skoranek, please go ahead. Welcome, sir.
Thank you to the members of the board. I am again joining you today to strongly urge the board to consider not moving to hybrid learning at all, to simply table that plan That plan, is a half loaf. Most members of this board, when it originally was proposed, said this is not a good plan, and said, but this is the best that we can do. I agree with the previous speaker. We should only go back to in-person when it is safe to do so for all students. That is both an equitable solution, and it is going to be, I believe, the most educationally appropriate solution for students, for teachers, and for support staff in the buildings alike. Last time I joined you, I spat out a lot of facts about COVID-19 and where we were. I will spare you the specific numbers, except to say that everything is much, much worse. And the curve continues to go up. To consider any time in the foreseeable future bringing students back into the classroom is irresponsible. Instead, this board should, in my opinion, instruct the administration to determine how they will bring students back when 100% in person is possible. One COVID number that does stick out to me, 560 cases per million in Ingham County, per the New York Times, some 480 per million per the Ingham County Health Department. Apparently there are some differences in how they do math and how they count cases. Those numbers are 3 times higher than the numbers based on the metrics suggested and utilized by this board. So I do not think at this time it is appropriate to even set a date to bring students back. And I think overall, a hybrid plan is not the way to move forward. Table bringing students back until the fall and be prepared for how to make the best of all online learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else for public comment? Anything through the website, Mr. Casson?
No, nothing has come in.
Okay, then we'll wrap up public comment for the evening. I appreciate our two guests this evening, and we'll move on to our superintendent's report. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, President Lemmer. I just have one item this evening, a personnel recommendation. Brianna Connerton is being recommended for hire as a social worker at Wilkshire Early Childhood Center. She has a BS in social work from Spring Arbor, and she was previously employed as a lead teacher for Holt Public Schools at their Midway Early Learning Center. And that's all I have for this evening.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, we have a discussion item, which is a Neola resolution regarding the Open Meetings Act. This is information we just received, and Ms. Polverendo, I'll let you walk us through a little bit about what we've received from Neola, what they're recommending, and the time frame that we probably need to act.
Sure. So this was provided to everybody in the drive. It is a resolution basically in regards to the legislation that was passed earlier this fall, allowing for continued meeting virtually for public bodies such as our Board of Education. And so the resolution reads to where we authorize the superintendent to create procedures to accommodate participation electronically for board members, for the public, to collect communication, and states that through the end of this calendar year, we can hold meetings electronically, and that going forward in the next year, electronic participation is solely under the circumstances set out, as well as the pre-existing law requiring accommodation for military duty. And then after the 31st of December 2021, only members absent for military duty can participate electronically, which is something that we adopted in the last 2 years. I don't remember exactly when, but it is part of our policies. So Neola offered this as something that we can consider. They did not, because of the time nature of the changes to the Open Meetings Act and when we can meet virtually, they did not recommend a change to our policy, but offered up this resolution to any district who might be interested in formally voting on agreeing to follow by the provisions that were set out in the legislation.
Thank you. And it's my understanding from that legislation that was passed is that basically any public body can meet remotely through the end of December of this year, but that anybody who wants to continue to meet remotely must identify a specific reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
And a specific reason can include public health crisis or emergency. So this would just move us forward with adopting those, I guess that it's not really a recommendation from the legislation. It's acknowledging the legislation, and it's establishing the fact that we are open to and willing to and agree to meet virtually if those conditions exist, continue to exist.
Tammy or Molly, can I ask a question about this?
Sure.
So is there, going into the new year, will there be a requirement, say on the president's behalf, to invoke this at each individual meeting? Or if we adopt this resolution, which allows for remote meetings during a public health crisis, and if we continue to have very high levels, is there an action that must be taken to conduct each meeting as a Zoom, or does adopting this resolution simply cover that?
So this would cover and give the superintendent the authority to create those procedures, is my reading of it. It does state that if the meeting location is held in an area that is affected, so for example, Ingham County is affected, the entire board can participate electronically, but otherwise, if we have members that are only in particular areas, so if only Ingham County was under more restrictive guidance from the health department, there were regulations that any of our members who live in Shiawassee or Clinton County, they wouldn't have to participate electronically. So it really does, I think, my reading of it is that it provides kind of the responsibility for the superintendent to create what those procedures are. And Tammy, I don't know if you have a different reading. It doesn't lay out specifically what has to be done to be able to meet electronically.
Yeah, I think my recollection, I was on a webinar by MASB on this as well, and I forgot to pull out my notes. But I think, so in a situation like we are in right now with Ingham County, our health officer has declared a public health emergency. If that public health emergency has been declared, then that by definition means the conditions exist to allow us to meet virtually. So in adopting the resolution, it means that we agree that we would continue to meet remotely in that public health emergency. I would need to look a little bit further in terms of if it's more localized, say something was happening, and again, the legislation does spell out if something was more local, if it was Haslett specific or within our boundaries, we would have the right, and I don't remember if it's Mr. Cook or me as president, I would have to clarify, but there is a procedure for saying or declaring it is not safe based on these circumstances or these conditions to meet in person. Therefore, we're going to continue to meet virtually. I think, but it's the intent, and for the public, the Neola is the body that sort of manages and tracks legislation that impacts schools and makes recommendations for school-based policies to make sure that we are in compliance with the legislation. So just for those people who are concerned that we're throwing around a lot of acronyms. So again, that's my understanding, is that because the legislation is pretty blanket through December, but it creates conditions for calendar year 2021. And then beyond that, as Molly said, for 2022, it narrows those circumstances back down to just those facing military service.
Okay. So if we take an action on this at a future board meeting, then we would then have to ask the superintendent to proceed with developing whatever the procedures are, the process needs to be for 2021. Okay.
Yeah. And I will say, I don't know that, I mean, clearly we are going to follow the legislation and the law that is out there. So it's not that if we decide not to adopt this resolution that we won't be abiding by all of those provisions that were passed around the Open Meetings Act. This is really just kind of an affirmation of, especially our intention going into 2021, that if there's a local health emergency, that we'll have procedures and we'll have steps in which to hold a meeting virtually.
Okay.
Are there other questions from board members, or Steve, do you have anything to add based on any communications you've had with Neola?
I do not.
All right, so we'll all make sure that we review the resolution. So we as a board don't often pass resolutions, and what was provided by Neola was pretty comprehensive. So we could pass what they've shared with us in its entirety, or we could simply vote and say that, we acknowledge the ability, or we, endorse the ability to meet remotely in stated public health crisis and leave it at that, or we could do something in the middle. So I'd encourage board members to make sure you look through that resolution and be prepared with any questions. And, we can decide when we do bring that up to a vote sometime between now and December, I think if this one was an odd one, it's December 30th as opposed to the 31st, if I remember correctly, or that might have been another piece of legislation that they picked an odd date. But regardless, before the end of the year, we should pass something to acknowledge the ability to formally meet remotely. Any other questions? Okay, great, thank you. So we'll move now to our action item, which is the recommended return to school timeline. Mr. Cook, I think you have some information for us to get us started on that.
I don't have any specific information. I just, we had talked about that recommendation in committee meetings.
Okay.
So I would just need a board member to make a recommendation for approval.
Would anyone like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion. I'm trying to word it right. I'll make a move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation for a timeline to return to school.
Let's be more specific and say which reflects a start date for elementary buildings of January 19th and secondary buildings on January 25th.
January 25th, right.
You accept that friendly
amendment? Yes,
amendment,
to actually
yeah.
include the dates, yes.
Yeah.
January 19th for elementary, January 25th for secondary.
And the recommendation, President Lemmer, was no sooner than.
No sooner.
Thank you, thank you.
I'll second it.
All right, that was Greg seconding?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion on the floor. So let's make sure that we're all on the same page and we understand what the implications are for that motion. Karen or Molly, as chairs of the committees, would either of you be willing to kind of recap where we stand?
Well, I think.
Not it, no, right?
Not it.
Yeah, I think where we stand is that the hybrid plan that we previously adopted would be implemented no sooner than January 19th for the elementary buildings and no sooner than January 25th for the high school buildings, or the middle school and high school, the secondary buildings. that means that the hybrid plans would be implemented, the schedules would be changed, and any adjustments to classroom assignments would occur according to those dates. The in-person instruction component of the plans would still be dependent upon the public health conditions in the county as to whether or not they met our metrics and it was appropriate to bring students in person into the buildings on those dates. It's possible that the public health conditions won't meet those metrics and the hybrid plan would be implemented and the in-person instruction would be postponed. We would continue in a remote, but the hybrid would take place, the schedules would change, and the classroom assignments, those aspects would go forward. Is that the nutshell?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but I wanted to clarify my understanding that for the secondary buildings specifically, that if we do not launch the in-person component, the secondary buildings would remain on the block schedule for time for asynchronous and synchronous learning and would not shift to the blue gold cohort schedule in order to maximize the synchronous learning. So that's a slightly different understanding than some of us had when we were first discussing the timeline.
That was the discussion that we had in our committee, and Tracy and Cammie can jump in at any point, but that the feedback and kind of in the discussions with the secondary teachers that they had asked for us to not go to the 6 class a day schedule until we actually go back to the in-person, the hybrid in-person, that as long as it was all online, they had asked to stay at the block schedule.
Facilities met several days prior to the policy committee. So
yeah,
we did not have that specific discussion, but I'm not at all opposed to that. I mean, it makes sense to me to keep the block scheduling.
Mm-hmm. But I do appreciate how clearly Karen stated that it's almost two different questions of timing. One is when the hybrid, any new class assignments that may have to happen, any new schedules would occur is a different decision and a different timeline than it might be to actually go back into the buildings. As our guest speakers tonight pointed out, and as we're all very well aware, the numbers in the state and in Ingham County are incredibly high as far as number of cases per million. And that's why we approved those metrics, was to have a guidance of when it might be safe to bring some students and to bring our staff back into the building. So while we might move forward with the hybrid being implemented, that's kind of part of the transition of when it's safe to start bringing some students back into the buildings.
I was just going to say, I think that's the essential communication that we need to know, that our community and our parents know, is that those changes are still going to happen even if in-person isn't beginning, because we have to be ready for when the metrics allow in-person to potentially start. And so it's not that, we're just trying to change it to change everything. It's the fact that it is a process that we have to go through. Otherwise, in-person would never be able to start because the cohorts wouldn't be assigned, the teachers wouldn't be set, etc.
And to that point, I know we had a question or concern about changing teachers, especially, specifically for our elementary buildings, because middle schoolers and high schoolers change teachers by design. But I do not have the numbers, and I think the cohorts are still being organized and assigned. But by no means does this mean every student is going to face a new teacher or have a new teacher. So our staff is making every effort to avoid that. And so I just want to make sure that our community knows that as well. It's not an ideal situation to make a change, But in some cases it may be necessary. It's not going to be necessary in every case. Are there other questions or clarifications about the timeline? And I thank you for clarifying that the language of the motion will include no sooner than, based on public health data and our established criteria.
Yeah, just one question, Tanya, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Superintendent Cook, just want to make sure this aligns with your letter of understanding in your recent negotiations with the HEA, and there's nothing conflicting with that, and everything seems to be running parallel.
Correct. We have been collaborating with HEA with regard to this decision and all of the implications of the decision. So we are in line.
Perfect.
Right, and HEA being the Haslett Education Association, which is our teachers group. Great, that's a very important question too, Greg. Thank you very much. All right, not seeing or hearing any other questions or discussion, we'll move to a vote. I will call a roll call in reference to our motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation to launch the hybrid timeline on January 19th for our elementary school buildings and January 25th for our secondary buildings. No sooner than those dates. Sorry, my notes are out of order. So we good on the motion, even though I just flubbed it?
I flubbed it to start. Sorry.
All right, so Treasurer East?
Yes.
Trustee Collins?
Yes.
Trustee Mashad?
Yes.
Trustee Maury?
Yes.
Vice President Palvarento? Oh, Molly, did you say yes?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Secretary Wheeler?
Yes.
Okay, and Lemmer votes yes. So the motion carries. So we will now move to the second action item on our agenda. It is proposed new policy 8450.05 related to emergency temporary telecommuting. This is also, actually, I'm not sure if this is related to legislation, but it is related to MIOSHA standards or a ruling that came out related to workplace safety. Ms. Palvarento, would you walk us through that, please? And it was attachment B in our board packets.
So MIOSHA, which is the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, issued emergency rules related to temporary telecommuting given the pandemic. So I'm going to go ahead. It's just 2 paragraphs and I'll read it. But again, all board members received a copy as well. So it's policy 8450.05, emergency temporary telecommuting policy. It states, in order to protect the health and safety of the district's employees, to contain the spread of COVID-19 and in compliance with the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration emergency rules, the Board of Education enacts this temporary emergency telecommuting policy for employees capable of performing their work assignment from home. For the duration of this policy, the district prohibits in-person work for employees to the extent that their work activities can feasibly be performed remotely. Such remote assignment for work activities shall be determined by the superintendent. Due to the nature of public education and the district's COVID-19 extended learning plan, not all employees are able to work remotely. Moreover, the nature of the district's business and operations requires daily interaction at the school buildings and at other designated facilities. Accordingly, this policy is temporary in nature and shall not be construed to create an entitlement to telecommute in the future, and it in no way changes the terms and conditions of employment with the district. This policy will cease to be in effect consistent with the end of the current COVID-19 health emergency, consistent with state law and applicable executive order and rule, and as determined by the superintendent and approved by the board. Employees who are directed to work from home under this policy will be notified by the superintendent when to return to their regular work stations and locations. Requests for continued telecommuting will be considered for qualified individuals with a disability who can perform the essential functions of the position with or without an accommodation. So that is the proposed policy. Given that these are emergency rules under MIOSHA, this is something that we actually need to act on quickly to be in compliance with their emergency rules.
Can I consider that a motion to adopt?
I will move that we adopt policy 8450.05. Yes.
And do we have a second?
Second. That's Karen, second.
Thank you. Nope, it's fine. All right, motion by Palvarento, second by East. Are there any questions related to that proposal? All right, hearing and seeing none, we'll move to a vote. Secretary Wheeler?
Yes.
Trustee Maury?
Yes.
Vice President Palvarento?
Yes.
Trustee Mashad?
Yes.
Trustee Collins?
Yes.
Treasurer East?
Yes.
And Lemmer votes yes. The motion carries. Thank you very much. We will move on to board reports. Finance and facilities.
We did meet, and we had a discussion with our technology director, Jeff Casson. He had sent a technology survey to families and students to gather information on how the technology connections were going and what problems they were having. And as a result of that, I think Mr. Casson's technology team sent out an email Friday or Monday, I'm not quite sure which day I saw it, but with some recommendations and some ideas for people to adopt to help with some of the freezing. But it was, it was a good discussion. It was good to see that the technology team took the initiative. They're very earnest, very creative problem solvers. We are lucky to have them, and I was happy to know that they had done the survey and had some fixes for people who might have been having some difficulties. We talked for a while about the responsive return to school timeline, and we had some questions for the superintendent, which he got answers for that helped inform the discussion that policy had. We talked a bit more about the COVID data and our metrics in the dashboard and how to communicate to our community about the metrics and present them in a table format so that the community can understand them and follow them as the days progress. We talked about having potentially putting another board meeting on the calendar at the end of December so that there could be a public forum to have those conversations about how the conditions are looking and what does January look like for the return to the hybrid plan. We talked more about a professional development for staff to get ready for the hybrid plan. And we had conversations about these two Neola, the Neola emergency policy and the resolution that we needed to, that we talked about tonight.
Great. Any questions about finance and facilities? All right, we'll move into policy and personnel report, please.
We had a very similar meeting as far as topics, and appreciate again Mr. Casson coming in and going over the results of the technology survey and what they had learned and how they would be using that going forward, including the tips that were sent out to families today. We also talked about the timeline and really talked about the importance of being clear that a transition to the hybrid plan did not necessarily mean we were coming back into the buildings, and that we are very aware of the levels of COVID in our communities and the need to be safe above and beyond for our students and for our staff. And so that those are kind of two different timelines. We talked about the data and about the data dashboard and where to find all of the data, as well as the metrics on the district website. To make sure we knew where all the most recent information was. We also discussed an additional board meeting as well as a second committee meeting in December. And again, just to continue the discussions as far as timeline for the implementation of the hybrid plan and where we are with the numbers in our community. We discussed the professional development activities that are planned for our staff as it relates to moving to the hybrid schedule, and the Neola recommendations around the resolution and the MIOSHA policy. And I think the only other thing that we discussed was just kind of an update on the learning labs, and that was kind of the shutdown of those labs was continued through tomorrow, and what the possibilities might be if there was going to be anything in December and going forward, and just what our special education staff are doing to support all of those students given this change.
Great, thank you. All right, any questions for policy and personnel? All right, we'll go to an update on Haslett Voices for Change. Mr. Cook, do we have any updates in that regard?
So we don't have any specific updates with the group, but we are scheduling Dr. Fanal, who's been assisting the district in putting together our equity plan, to meet with our committees in December to discuss the timeline and plan for moving forward. So we're going to have some conversations at the committee level, and he's going to lay out kind of what our plan's been. We've had some delays, obviously, due to COVID. So we're going to try to get it back on direction. But he's also been working with our staff doing professional development. We've been hearing some positive results, positive feedback from our staff from what the work that he's doing with individual staff in our district. So we're preparing for him to meet with the committee in December. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move to items from board members, and I will use this opportunity, as was discussed in committees. We talked about the desire and probably the what am I trying to say? It would be a good idea to meet for a second time in December. So I would like to use this forum to announce that. And so if we are on our second and fourth week of the month schedule, that would bring us to December 28th. And I think that was the date you had all discussed in committees. So we'll use this forum to officially announce that there will be a December 28th business meeting of the Board of Education. Since it was not officially listed on our approved meeting dates at the beginning of the year, it is considered a special meeting. But by announcing it in advance, and all board members have now officially been notified, that meeting is now official. Are there any other comments from board members this evening?
Tammy, it's Tracy. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, you go ahead, Tracy.
Oh, I just wanted to take a minute, and I know we have thanked the teachers for doing this, but I also want to thank the counselors and social workers who have been reaching out regularly to students and doing mental health checks on a regular basis and following up with students who may be struggling. I just wanted to take a moment to tell them thank you and that it is noticed and appreciated.
Excellent, thank you very much.
And I wanted to send kudos to the second grade teachers at Ralia, who in the fall would typically be spending a week at Meridian Village with their students, exploring many practices of the past in the historic village. And they're working very hard to send them on virtual field trips this week. And they've been reaching out, and I made them a video this weekend of weaving. I had one of my college students home finishing a semester remotely, who was my videographer. But kudos to them for trying to figure out how to continue to bring that experience to their second graders in this school year.
That's great. Well, and thank you for doing that. I know you've reported on that in the past, and seems to me like you have a lot of fun with it, and we know our students really enjoy and value that time, and I'm glad to hear that the teachers are being creative with a virtual experience. So thank you for your efforts. Any other comments from board members? All right, well, let's move right along then to our consent agenda. We have 4 items this evening for consideration. I will read all 4 of them. If anyone needs anything pulled for questions or clarifications, please let me know. Item number 1 is approval of the minutes from the November 9th, 2020 regular school board meeting. Item number 2, approval of minutes from the November 17th Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Item number 3, approval of minutes from the November 20th Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. And item number 4 is the personnel recommendation for the hiring of Brianna Canarton, sorry, as a social worker at Wilkshire. Other than my mishandling of her name, are there any need to pull any of those items? All right, I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda, please.
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Motion by Maury, second by?
I'll second.
Second by Wheeler, thank you. I don't know that we need to do a roll call for this one. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much. Move to announcements. Let me get my paper out. We do have a Finance and Facilities Committee meeting scheduled for December 1st at 9 a.m. That will be held in the boardroom of the Administration Building. We have a Policy and Personnel Committee meeting scheduled for December 2nd at 9:30 a.m. also in the boardroom of the Administration Building. We have a regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on December 14th at 7 p.m. The meeting will be held remotely. And we now have a special board meeting scheduled on December 28th at 7 p.m., which will also be held remotely. That is our agenda for the evening. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn. That was
I
Karen.
second.
Motion by East, second by Paul Barrento, I believe. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Everybody.